I was quite fortunate in that I lived in the UK where the gender clinic was very good and the waiting times weren't too terrible. So in my part, it was 1.5 years, but they managed to backtrack my referral to when the psychiatrist failed to refer me to the clinic. The problem is, it's pretty much what they call a postcode lottery here, meaning where you live in the UK, your doctor's surgery and the clinic that your geographic area is assigned to depends on where you're going to be seen, how quickly, and how efficient the service is. Some people at Exeter wait 7 years and then they get kicked off the practice list. There was someone on Reddit that was repeatedly saying this was the experience and they tried so many things. Other people get seen in like a few months. I know someone in Scotland that got seen very quickly. It's really relative to the location you're in. So for HRT, I needed to get a gender dysphoria diagnosis, and I had an appointment with the consultant at the gender identity clinic. And then what happened was they would write a recommendation, go through the system to your doctor, and then you can get a prescription for HRT. Before you do that, they want to do blood tests because they have to check your hormone levels in your blood. And the good thing about doing it through the NHS is that once you're actually in the system, they can do it a lot more efficiently. Like they can monitor the blood levels using their equipment, have an automated kind of like system where based on your hormone levels, they can adjust what you're prescribed and you have like regular checkups. I'm very lucky in that respect. I can't say the same for everyone in the UK. And what's concerning is the number of doctor surgeries that are starting to refuse people's HRT. They're refusing working with the gender clinics based on their own beliefs. And unfortunately, because of the way the law is worded, there are now loopholes that certain clinics and certain individuals from a given ideology are trying to manipulate to restrict trans healthcare in the UK.
I should add that you do not necessarily have to monitor your blood levels closely for HRT. There is no evidence that this is even beneficial in the first place, like some people think that it might be. But there isn't really any good science for how to regulate your hormone levels based on what you measure in the blood in the first place.
Well, that's essentially what they do. Like, they measured mine, and for like a while, my estrogen ranges have been, and even testosterone and other blocker have been pretty much a carbon copy of a cis woman's hormones at my age, which was very reassuring for me, and it reassured the clinic that they continue with the hormone treatment plan that I was on.
Okay, but the problem is we don't know if this is ideal, though it might be, but we can only guess at this point.
I'd always strongly recommend getting blood tests done for this type of thing, because you
Why?
never know what interaction you could have as well. It's not just a safety procedure, but it's also, if you're doing DIY, for instance, you wouldn't want to waste your money on hormones that, you realize you're putting the wrong type in your body or adjusting it the wrong way. It's pretty much like the debugger for your program, where your program is your HRT, and this is like telling you the stuff that's coming up.
Yeah, it is useful to see that HRT is working, but you don't need to do it like every week, like
They
once
don't
a
do
year.
that. No, they do it periodically. They do it whenever you're changing your HRT like dosage, or you're going on to something different. And they usually do it around then. They won't do it all the time.
My endo, they want it every 3 months.
Yeah, I do mine every 3 months. And to be clear, I do think it's necessary to get your blood work.
I need to get my name changed on my health card because I'm unable to see the blood tests myself, but my doctor can see them and stuff. So I'm unsure on how I'm doing. He says that it's good, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah, there is testosterone level to consider, there is estrogen level to consider, and I think a lot of people used to look at what's normal for cis females and then they try to copy that, which should work. It's like a safe bet, but we don't know if this is really optimal yet.
I know enough that when I had my T blockers and they adjusted for those levels, I noticed physical changes in my body. Like they were more noticeable.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we have to base it on like anecdotal evidence like you experience. It will be better if we had like good studies on this. It will be way easier to make recommendation then.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, if you're going to go through like getting it not through DIY in the UK, and this will actually be quite relevant to the topic that we're talking about gatekeeping here, is basically you need to have either work with a gender clinic or you can go through a private clinic like Gender Care or somewhere. But I've heard a lot of people work with this other private clinic called Gender GP, and like, okay, and this is not my view, but this is what I've read online and what I've heard from a lot of people that have been on it, that because of some issues with the way that they're conducting their business or their practice, a lot of surgeries have stopped working with them, and that's why I say it's very important to like make sure that the clinic you're going to, whether you're paying for it or you go to the NHS, the NHS obviously they're going to say yes to, but like I said, they're starting to make excuses for that as well. But like you need to make sure that it's legit so that they can legally continue with the treatment plan. In the UK, there's two things. There's your GP, and then there's your clinic. And the clinic is the one that like gives you the diagnosis and will recommend like your hormones and everything. And the GP is the middleman basically that works through them, so that the GP is basically your doctor at surgery. And then they like will write off the prescription for you, and then you collect it at a pharmacy, and that's how you get your HRT. And then at the same surgery, you'll get a nurse to have your blood sample. That'll be sent to the gender clinic too. So yeah, that's essentially what it is. And the main issue, as you can imagine, in the UK is that sometimes the GPs want to prescribe like bridging hormones or like any prescription, and the gender clinic will tell them to wait. More often than not, it's the other way around. The gender clinic will recommend hormones, and then the GP will just refuse to work with them. There was a surgery in my city, one of them that because of his religious views or his background, he ends up being him, and like it was a father and son business basically, and they were extremely incompetent with trans people and would just pretend to like not get their emails or get anything through. And it's the sad thing is this is entirely legal. They're able to do that. There's no means of investigation. So all I'd say is be careful of like which surgery you're at, and if you're one that's giving you bullshit, just don't. It's not even worth challenging it. Just move if you can to another surgery. Usually, that's enough of a reason. If they're not giving the correct amount of care, usually that's enough of a reason for you to like justify moving to another surgery outside of your catchment area. But yeah, this is mainly for UK people if you're listening.
Yeah, I think you shouldn't rush into having surgery in the first place. For many people, it can actually be worthwhile to just travel to somewhere like in America or Thailand or Korea where they actually have competent surgeons rather than just going to your local surgeon and then
The thing
you
in
get like...
America is that we all know that it depends on your state, and also it depends on your health insurance plan. In the UK, the important thing to note is that you have the NHS, and that's kind of it, unless you want to do DIY. There isn't really a trans inclusive private health insurer here, like Bupa, Spire. They don't really cover trans related things. Like that's not part of their insurance plan. So like if you wanted to have like stuff to do related with gender, you'd pretty much have to go through the NHS or pay for it out of your own pocket. This is also why it makes it extremely frustrating to be trans in the UK, because there's no way you can get facial feminization surgery unless you live in one of the very few areas in the UK where the NHS include that in their gender clinic. But like in America, for instance, you can work at Starbucks or work somewhere, and like eventually, if you're loyal enough, they will give you FFS or like they'll give you hormones, at least help you with your transition. You don't get that here. You get a pronoun pin, maybe a slap on the back, a pronoun pin that most people won't even respect, and maybe a few pride flags in the office, and that's it. If you're lucky.
That's actually how I got my FFS, by the way. I worked for a company that helped sponsor it, and well, I got it covered like 80% of the cost. So I do feel very lucky. Well, I live in Texas, and there's a nonprofit here called Texas Health Action, and they help trans women with free hormones if they're poor, and it's an informed consent model. And of course, it's not that way in every state. but I am actually pretty happy with the way it is here.
Interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't really think they'd have that type of thing in Texas. I wouldn't think they'd be allowed to practice it either, but I guess even though it's a southern state, it's not Florida.
Yeah, even some red states are actually better than the UK because at least there is a private sector that they can like save your ass.
That's what I mean. So, like, even though a lot of people can say that, like, a lot of capitalist models can be quite, not helpful for trans people, I think in this case, you at least have the freedom to pay for it. If you're in the UK, you pretty much can't unless you want to pay for it upfront yourself, and then there's no reasonable way you're going to be able to make that enough money in such a short amount of time anyway.
Yeah, you basically have to borrow money somehow and then travel overseas to get FFS in the UK.
The way the UK works, and it's kind of sad now, but it's kind of how it is, and I think this might be how the NHS ends up as well. The way the UK works at the moment is it pretty much is like a socialized oligopoly, and bear with me on this one. In capitalist societies, you get companies that are pretty much competing for something, and there's supply and demand, sometimes through less, than honest reasons they are more successful than others. But in the UK, you used to have a nationalized scheme where, like, the trains, for instance, were run by the government, the buses are run by the government. Nowadays, you don't have the capitalist model, you don't have the complete, government run model either. What you have is a few favorites. Oligopolies, basically, a few favorites picked by the government that are licensed to perform through their supervision, and pretty much no one else can do the same thing. So you get like the top 3 bus companies, the top 3 train companies, and they're all part of National Rail or something, and they'll all work towards that, and they'll be supervised by the government, but no one else can kind of get. And in the end, it's pretty much just the government, but they're just removing the responsibility for them to provide the service to the citizens by putting it on private companies, but the private companies themselves don't have that
accountability.
They don't have the responsibility or the interest of doing that solely. They have a profit-based, interest. They'll solely serve their best customers, the ones that pay the most money. And I personally think that's how the UK is fucked at the moment. It's why train prices are so extremely expensive. And for instance, if I want to go and meet a friend from the other side of the country, it'll cost me the same to get there by rail as it would to take a flight to Italy and back. In some cases, it's pretty much just ridiculous, and I think that's one of the main reasons. The fact they've tried to merge socialism and capitalism all into one, it's turned up into another government overseen oligopoly where the government doesn't exactly care about this particular area. They just turn a bit of a blind eye through incompetence and bureaucracy, and this is the result. We get extremely high waiting times, we get inflated prices, we get an economy that could be headed towards crashing. As this now, the reason I say this is relevant is because this is pretty much bringing back to what we're talking about with healthcare providers and health insurance, and why it probably wouldn't work in the UK.
Yeah, what they basically do is that the government wants someone else to take the blame when something goes wrong, so they say, oh, it was this bad private actor, now we find another one to screw it up instead.
Yeah.
They don't care about if it's mismanaged, they just don't want to be responsible for when things go wrong.
And the interesting thing is the government, they're removing people's powers to protest this type of stuff now. They're actually passing new laws so you can't complain about it.
I'm not even surprised. I always had this uneasy feeling about the UK. It's like a nanny state vibe. They are...
Yeah. There's a lot of good things about the UK, but a lot of those good things are pretty much starting to... It's like a set of teeth that are rotting that hasn't been brushed for a very long time. There's a lot of things that need to be reformed, and now incompetence and bureaucracy are the two main things that are threatening what was once a great set of services in theory that is pretty much crumbling apart in practice. The equipment, the technology, the expertise is there. Once you get seen by the NHS, sometimes you get seen by people that are the best in their field. But whether you get seen, or whether the admin staff will pretend to lose your script, or they might just lose your script because the database system is running on, remember we were talking about COVID, was it ages ago with COVID, the whole freaking database was run on an Excel spreadsheet, which is kind of insane considering, the technology that's available. And they actually had issues recording the events that would happen because the spreadsheet got too large. And this is a very big organization that has a lot of funding, was meant to have a lot of funding, that was tackling an extremely sensitive issue. Now, obviously, I can't speak all about this. I can only say, because I'm not I didn't have first-hand experience of that, but this is from, what happened at the time. What I'm saying basically is, yeah, it can be concerning when the government tries to put its hands too much and control too many things. This is what you get. People just stepping on each other's tails and not even noticing there was a tail there in the first place.
And what we see when governments are incompetent is that it drags everything down with it, and then when we have those very intrusive governments with a lot of responsibility, which is very common, is that then it takes everything down with it, and this is what we are seeing now in the UK, like everything is going down with the government. So there is this notion that we will need to control who is and isn't allowed to transition. And this can be based on whatever pseudoscience you prefer. There are various schools of thought, theories how to determine who should be allowed to transition and not to transition. There are a lot of problems with that. For example, in a lot of countries, there are very long waiting times for official prescription, because you have to go through a therapist to get HRT, and this can take years. It becomes even worse if the government intentionally screws the system up. So instead of openly banning trans healthcare, like in some red states, they try to make it hard to get access to it. And this is a big problem in countries with socialized healthcare. But the notion is that you're going to let this therapist, this psychiatrist or whatever decide who is allowed to gain access to HRT. So then you have to go to them, say to them what you think they want to hear to get the medication you think you will benefit from.
So I would talk to my doctor about my hormone stuff and wanting breasts and other things, and what I was currently taking, which was bovine ovary. And then he put me on a 3-year wait list to see a psychiatrist in order to start HRT. It was a little ridiculous for sure, and it took me way too long to even get the healthcare I needed. I really wish I didn't get put on a 3-year wait list and just went to an informed consent clinic.
Yeah, and what I know, because I've studied this topic medically speaking, is that waiting 1 or 2 years can be disastrous. It can be the difference between passing and not passing, or needing FFS or not needing FFS. And facial feminization surgery is expensive. It can cost $20, $40, $60,000. You have to find the right doctor for you. And you might not want to undergo a such radical procedure just to pass as a female. While if you just started 2 years earlier, you would have been just fine without it.
Yeah, for real. I was kind of lucky with the 3 years I had, but I wish I didn't have to wait at all, that was just a pointless wait for sure.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a sort of a blending of gatekeeping with just transphobic intentions, for example, a very recent development here in the United States is that in many states, here in Texas where I'm at, in a lot of other southern states, children or people under 18 years old are no longer allowed to take hormones or take any steps whatsoever towards transitioning. And that's something that is openly talked about as it's for protecting children or preventing people from detransitioning, but it's all coming from a place of transphobia. It's just a way to limit the influence and basically the existence of trans people. So I just kind of feel like gatekeeping and these transphobic intentions are very openly, mingling with each other.
I think what we do see happen is that some people are like not fully transphobic or at least not openly so. They just want to limit it. So what they might do is that they say, oh, we are going to let some people transition that could benefit from it medically, and then they let like 1% access to the treatment and 99% cannot get it. This is like almost as bad as banning it completely, while they pretend that they are still providing the healthcare because there are evidence for it. It can also be that people think that we should have checks in place, we have to prevent people from maybe transitioning, so I think that it's worth like gatekeeping 1,000 people to prevent one person from detransitioning, which doesn't make sense logically speaking, like the cost benefit isn't there at all. And I can even say this openly. If we have one person transitioning and then another person starting HRT and then stopping because they regretted it, it's still a net positive overall because the person who transitioned benefited a lot more than the person who started HRT and then stopped like 1 week later lost, and this is not even close.
Yeah, especially with male to female transitions that are far more reversible than people make them out to be. And as far as what you mentioned about only banning certain portions of the population or limiting rather than banning outright, I actually feel that the minor bans are more honest and just better than, for example, what the UK is doing, where the wait lists are so long that nobody can transition. At least here in Texas, with informed consent, after you're 18, you can do it. There's like an honest ban for those people, and then you can do it. But in the UK, the methods being used to prevent people from transitioning are dishonest and have like much worse consequences because it's basically banning everyone.
I think they would have done the same in Texas if they could, but in America there isn't the socialized healthcare, there are all those private actors who can provide it, and this makes it a lot harder to ban it via dishonest means, so they have to make a law against it. Then often those laws get overturned in court as well because it's not based on evidence. There have been so many cases of transphobic legislation being destroyed in court because they just don't have the evidence backing it up.
Yeah, and I do think that they would ban it if they could. I actually think socialized healthcare can be a good thing in many cases, but in the case of like transgender care, putting healthcare in the hands of one single group of people can be catastrophic, as we're seeing in the UK.
And also I would like to clarify that you can have government funded healthcare coexisting with the private options. You don't have to just choose one or the other, you can actually have both at the same time if you want to.
Yeah, in the UK you can go private from what I understand, but there's no informed consent, and I hear that it's like a lot of money to go private.
Yeah, I think they are sabotaging the private clinics as well there. So this leaves us with DIY HRT option, which is honestly the only viable option these days for a lot of people. And this is why we provide the resources for that in this community, because in a lot of places this is the only real way to access HRT without waiting years. And there is a lot of misinformation regarding DIY HRT. It's actually a lot safer than people make it out to be. There's very rarely someone have any complication from DIY HRT. The few cases I heard about has been like intentional poisoning by transphobic actors, which is very rare. There was one case of cat hair in vials from Otokonoki Pharmacy, but there wasn't actually anyone getting harmed from that. It was basically harmless, but still maybe alarming. You can just order from someone else if you can.
Yeah, DIY can be perfectly fine as long as you get your lab work done. That's actually how I started. And when I started a transition, there were some expectations from a lot of medical providers that you had to be living for a certain time as your target gender and stuff like that. and there were other requirements. So what I read online was that I should just start hormones on my own, just do DIY, and then go to a doctor. And when you went to the doctor and told them, hey, I've been on hormones for 2 months, then they would prescribe you hormones because they were afraid of you maybe harming yourself or something, and they would then give you hormones immediately, as opposed if you just went to the doctor right away, you would be sent to a therapist where they would want to determine whether you're mentally fit according to them to transition or not. So that was a way of expediting your transition to just do DIY for a couple months.
Yeah, I heard about other people doing this successfully as well, and it's really illustrates that nice people finish last. There was actually a study about this where they looked at people who did lie to their therapists and did DIY HRT, and then they compared it to the people who were honest, or at least more honest and followed the recommendation more. And they found that there was basically no difference in outcomes, but the people who did the DIY HRT and were less compliant got their treatments way faster. This was actually a Finnish study, it was done years ago and nobody talks about it. But this kind of debunks this true scum ideology that we don't need this person telling us who should or shouldn't transition. I think it's very arrogant for someone to say that they know who will benefit from it and who will not benefit from it. But a lot of people in psychiatry that think that they know better than the patient is very widespread in the entire mental health industry, that they should be able to dictate what patients do and do not do.
I honestly don't understand the methodology used to determine whether you're trans or not, or I don't even know that there's a clear definition of what constitutes gender dysphoria.
I mean, there isn't, there are criteria in the DSM that tend to change with every new edition of it. And that criteria is based on exactly zero science. There is no evidence that people who meet that criteria have better transitions. There is very vague evidence 20 years ago, something like that, where they did compare people who fit the core criteria for transsexualism or whatever, and they found that they had lower regret rates, but then they found that the social factors were far greater. So scientifically speaking, there isn't really any backing for that true trans ideology or gatekeeping, and you have to meet a certain criteria. There's the science isn't there, but politically speaking, it's comfortable for a lot of fence sitters to be somewhere in between. Do I support some trans people, but only if they are trans in the way we want. So there are those transphobes out there who are practically transphobic, but they are okay as long as it fits their very narrow definition or view of what it means to be transgender. And otherwise they very much look down upon you, think you're valid.
Yeah, and I think gender dysphoria is a shady concept still. And well, I don't think it's necessary for you to have a successful outcome in transitioning. I don't think you have to feel that way. I also think that some people, when they do feel that way, they don't recognize it as such, or they describe it in some other way. It's just such a subjective, personal decision. It really is a little strange to have other people kind of decide that for you.
And I can tell that even for me, who tend to have a more objective, pragmatic perspective than most people, it's still really hard to give recommendations, because I cannot know how the other person is feeling. And what a lot of people do is that they project their feelings upon other people. So for example, if someone is gender dysphoric, they think that other people also feel strong about their gender Because for them, gender is a very important part of their identity. They project that on other people, or if they have gender dysphoria the same way, that they think that other people would feel very bad if the gender was switched. But this is not really how humans work in reality. It's just that people like to project how they are feeling upon other people. And this is understandable as well, because it's a lot harder to understand someone who is very different from them. I have learned that to some degree later on in my life. I become better at it. But yeah, it's not easy. It's very hard to give those recommendations.
Yeah, that has actually been a struggle for me to not project my own feelings or like my own standards of transness onto other people, because I did have gender dysphoria and very strongly. So for a very long time, I felt that, well, when I first heard that people were transitioning without gender dysphoria, I had a knee-jerk reaction that that person can't be trans, you know? And it's taken a little bit of self-reflection to, realize that my feelings don't apply to the rest of the world. And also to realize that I was being kind of elitist, like I didn't want other people to have what I had, or it was a way for me to feel superior to other people and to put others down just to build myself up. I think that's a big factor in self-policing within the trans community.
To be honest, I actually understand the desire to be unique and special, because I kind of feel like that too as well, that I like being unique and achieving special things. I don't think you should make being trans that. You should really try for other things that are harder to achieve, because there are so many people with gender dysphoria anyway. There are so many people who are transitioning to just that should like define you. Try to find something better if you're going to be an elitist. Like, it can be anything that is like prayer on how to achieve, and try to find that instead, like building wealth instead.
Yes, there are bigger and better goals. Being trans, it's closer to a lifestyle and just expression more so than it is like a massive goal. Like, of course, passing and these things are good goals to have, but just being trans itself isn't that big of a deal for sure.
Yeah, some people really do take their transness and turn it into like their entire life, and their entire ideology kind of revolves around that, doesn't it? So at that point, when it's your whole identity, it might become a little easier to just start kind of discriminating against other trans people because you don't have anything else going on. It's like your hobby is to be trans, and that can be unhealthy.
And to be clear, I'm not necessarily blaming people for wanting to be unique or anything like that. I think it's natural to want to be special and achieve great things. Everyone wants to do that. Or at
Yeah, and I
least a lot
certainly
of
feel the same
people.
way.
I see so many people who are like desperate for like be special and want attention and all that, but please be smart about it. That's all I am asking. I'm not blaming you for wanting to be famous or special or rich or anything like that. Just do not be an idiot about it. Try to think for like 10 seconds.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be special, and I think we all feel that way. But it gets a little toxic once you start putting other people down, especially when it's just for, feeling different or thinking different than you do.
One example of me having to avoid projecting too much is with regard to late transitions, because for me personally this is very much an appealing, and I feel like if I cannot become like fully female, like even if I could pass but not get pregnant, that will still feel insufficient for me. It's important that I do not project that to other people, because other people do not feel the same way as I do. So this is a case of me not transitioning because I cannot get what I want, but I also recognize that other people do not have the same goals as I have, and for them it can be very much beneficial.
Yeah, personally, I couldn't just go on living as a man. I didn't know if I was gonna pass. but I had to express myself as a female in some way, so it is just a different perspective.
Yeah, I think this marks the end of episode 36 of the Transmaxxing podcast. I hope that you will have a nice day forward and that you do not have to wait 3 years for HRT. Goodbye everyone!